Greetings everyone and a very warm welcome to ADDIS Dialogue. With it, I'm Teferra Shiawl, and today my guest is Teferra Shiawl, who is a long-serving diplomat and journalist. We'll be spending some time talking about the AU summit, which Ethiopia is hosting, and to stay with us. Ambassador Teferra, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Ethiopia has shown the whole world that it is capable of hosting huge events in the past, and the East African nation has also finalized preparations and is hosting the 35th edition of the AU summit. What kind of message does this convey to the continent of Africa, to others, especially those that are bent on, disrupting this huge event?
That's a very good question. I think we should start from the premise of success and failure.
All right.
Ethiopia has always proven to be a successful country in hosting any kind of African or international level meeting. This 35th session of the African Union's summit meeting comes at a time, or rather in the wake of our finalizing the repulsion by the Ethiopian forces, by the militia and others, of those forces that were hell-bent on advancing on Addis Ababa and trying to disrupt the good image that Ethiopia had in its international standing as a player in global politics and as a major player in African politics. It's not the first time that this kind of challenge has been posed on Ethiopia. Ethiopia has had many times been a victim of those who tried to encroach on its independence, on its example of an African free country. And therefore, the message that it sends is that Ethiopia is still stable. Ethiopia is still a state of ancient standing, a state that looks to the future with hope and aspiration, and a state that has struggled so much, paid so much sacrifice to be what it is.
All right, thank you, Ambassador. Now, this being as it is, there have been relentless efforts to rid Addis Ababa of its rights to host major events, including the AU summit that you've just mentioned. So how has this overturned the conspiracy, by some Western nations that are hell-bent, as you said, on disrupting such huge events? And also, to what extent is it diplomatic success?
Well, the Western nations know the capacity that Ethiopia has in hosting such events. The Western nations knew when the Organization of African Unity was hosted in Ethiopia during its opening summit. At that time, it was Emperor Haile Selassie and his cabinet and his group of technocrats that made it possible through interaction with their colleagues and counterparts in all then just free African countries. Now, the holding of the summit by itself is not an end in itself. The holding of the summit signifies the fact that Ethiopia traditionally, today, in the past, and in the future, is a partner, a brother, a sister of all African countries. Africans have seen Ethiopia as a beacon of hope and independence. Africans have counted on Ethiopia's support in their quest for freedom, in their quest for development. And we know that the Western world, they regret the fact that they have they had to quit Africa by force and grant independence. But Ethiopia has earned its independence. It has fought for its freedom. Yes, certain countries of late, like South Africa, with the ANC fighting, the other African countries that struggled, like Algeria, have earned their independence. And Ethiopia has always been on their side. And you remember that Ethiopia was the first to champion the freedom and independence of Somalia from Italian and British colonialism.
Right.
So Sudan from British condominium of Egypt and Sudan.
Yeah.
And also of several West African countries and Southern and Eastern African countries. They counted and they count on Ethiopia for support in their independent existence.
All right. Beautifully put, Ambassador. Now, let's also talk about the idea of Pan-Africanism. As you know, the idea of Pan-Africanism flares up here and there, and then it soon, diminishes.
Well, let's
right.
When we talk about Pan-Africanism, Ethiopia is perhaps among the first Pan-Africanist countries.
Yeah.
When the brothers and sisters in the Caribbean, in England, in West Africa, in Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa, looked for an African common denominator, they spoke of Pan-Africanism. Why? Because the Battle of Adwa made it possible for Ethiopians to show the world that also black peoples are invincible, that they can fight and preserve their independence. And during the Italian occupation, before the Second World War, when Italy was the aggressor at that time, I remember my father telling me that fighters from Ghana, from the Sudan, and from Southern Africa, from Eastern Africa, who were under British and other colonial rule, came to fight alongside Ethiopian patriots. Then, after independence, the same spirit persisted, because Ethiopia fought for the independence of Namibia, because Namibia, Southwest Africa, was occupied by the Boers and the English colonialists of South Africa at that time, and they had to go to the World Court to make the liberation of Namibia a success. Then, the first among the items that the African Union, during its founding, established was the African Liberation Committee. And Ethiopia was among the first countries that was spearheading the struggle to free all Africa from colonialism. Thanks to the struggle of our forefathers, who did their best to bring about the freedom, the liberation of their countries. And thanks to the support we got from the socialist bloc at that time, from China, through Afro-Asian solidarity, we succeeded in dismantling colonialism from the rest of Africa. So this predicates Ethiopia as a country that is fit to be a partner of all African countries for development and future growth.
All right. This being as it is, many say that this movement is not institutionalized and not that robust. So in your view, how should it be institutionalized?
Very good. The very fact that African leaders got together after the different approaches of Monrovia, Casablanca Group, etc., and they established the Organization of African Unity, and with the vision of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah to build or set up a continental union, this in itself is a Pan-Africanist act. So Pan-Africanism has been strengthened through the activities, the struggles for independence by the African peoples. So Pan-Africanism has been really from the start supported by the struggle, by the waged by the African people, and by visionary leaders. Well, there were, when you talk about institution, Pan-Africanist Congress was held in Manchester in so many years back, in 100-something years back, and at that time, Dr. Nkrumah and George Padmore and also Dubois from the Caribbean joined them. All black peoples were represented, and this has not been possible or made it possible to establish a regular institution. But African Union is an institution of Pan-Africanist approach. The African Union is an institution of Pan-Africanism. You can't separate the two.
Mm-hmm. All right. One of the top agendas of the African Union Summit is expected to be Agenda 2063. And the economic integration might, among others, of course, be top on the agenda. We've been hearing of this agenda also for a long time, this Agenda 2063. But where is its practicality? Has it stuck somewhere?
It is practical, because the building blocks for Agenda 63 have already been in progress.
Okay.
COMESA, the Common Market of Southern and Eastern Africa,
yeah.
IGAD, and ECOWAS, and many other Pan-African, or rather Pan-African institutions have been set up. These are the building blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And the vision of our forefathers, the founders of the African Union, the founders of the Organization of African Unity, was ultimately to have a common currency, a common military force, a common central bank.
Mm-hmm.
These are visions. And then this vision has to be supported by practical approach, which means infrastructure. We still need to build a road between Dakar and Djibouti, between Cairo and Cape Town, and between Kinshasa and Khartoum. So these are the wishes of the African leaders, that while trying to cope with the building of infrastructure, but you see, imperialism and former colonialists,
right,
who regret having lost this very rich continent, the control of this rich continent, don't want a third party to come and take the wind from their sail.
Mm-hmm.
China is a major player now. It's a partner of Africa in infrastructure building, in development. And so if Ethiopia and the rest of Africa unite and resolutely start to realize the dream of road connections, telephone networks, and the free airspace has already been realized, there could be a lot of benefit to derive from.
Right. And also in this connection, how can the idea of Pan-Africanism, the ideology of Pan-Africanism, help reinforce the ties of the nations on the continent and also close the doors against foreign meddling?
The Pan-Africanism idea could be propagated through educating the young people. You know, Africans decided to set up a Pan-African university. It was meant to be set up in Adwa, where Menelik and his forces for the first time defeated a major European colonial aggressor. Unfortunately, with the kind of situation we have in our country now, in the north, the rebels have not made it possible for that university to function properly. We hope once the Ethiopian people defeat the idea of this separate existence of the regions and the provinces, then we will get back to reactivating the Pan-African University. But apart from that, every country, I believe, should set up a mechanism or an educational system whereby school children from the beginning, from the kindergarten upwards, should be educated in the philosophy, in the idea of Africanness, Pan-Africanism, that they as Africans have a pride to protect, that they as Africans have a country, a region, a continent to develop. So this is how Pan-Africanism could flourish.
Okay. The fact that the African Union is still funded by some Western nations is taken as some of the reasons making it not that strong or robust. So how should Africans finance it independently and create a stronger
Well, you see, when the Organization of African Unity was set up, they had no money. And each state had contributed, modest as it is, some money for the setup of the organization. Later, when the former colonialists felt that there is a way of indirectly controlling this continental union, they came up with assistance. To take the assistance is no problem.
Yeah.
But we should also think of how we can fund this institution. At one stage when Muammar Gaddafi of Libya had a surplus of dollars from his oil revenues, he, rather than strengthening the African Union, he thought he could buy any country for his short-term desires, like, say, moving the African Union from headquarters from Addis Ababa to Sirte, in the middle of nowhere in the desert.
Yeah.
Or that others were also hell-bent on financing insurrections, fights against established governments. And then, now later, they came up with the idea of the African Union's Peace Force. When it came, the Peace Force is largely funded by the European Union, former colonies.
Right.
It's a shame, but the resources are there in Africa. Petrol is there in Africa. Uranium is there in Africa. If some of those countries with the huge resources in their belly could chip in some of what nature has given them, Africa doesn't need to be begging others to be helped to set up its institutions and build infrastructures, etc.
Yeah.
So we can borrow because we have the resources to pay back our debts.
Yeah.
But the resoluteness to free yourself from external debt is very important.
All right. Let's also talk about the United Nations Security Council and the seat of Africa. As you know, African leaders have been voicing their dismay that the continent of Africa was not, or still is not, represented and doesn't have the permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. What's your take on the leaders' call, and what should be done in the future?
Well, you know, Africa is a huge population. That these people are not represented in the highest decision-making body of an international institution like the United Nations is injustice. It is a shame. And after the Second World War, a certain number of countries that were the victors took it upon themselves to be the decision makers. And of course, the others had no power at that time. They couldn't argue, so they had a veto power. Now, whatever we say, if we say no, it is no. If one of us says no, it is no. That is what they instituted, the mechanism of negation or appreciation. So in this decision-making mechanism, Africa was denied its rightful place. So it's a question of justice that we argue for a place in the United Nations Security Council. It is, and therefore, if our leader, our prime minister, is advancing this idea, it has also been advanced by others, and therefore we have to be the beneficiaries of what the international institutions could give by way of representation.
Some connected this issue with neocolonialism. So can we create a connection between neocolonialism and Africa's?
Well, not fully. I can't say China is a neocolonialist because it's a member of the Security Council. I can't say Russia is a neocolonialist. It is in the Security Council. But if you talk about France, Britain, and the United States, they had large tracts of colonies. And after the war, they were the victors. And the judgment they passed was from the victor's point of view. The benefits they took was the victor takes it all.
Yeah.
So the present situation with regard to the Security Council is there are those who would support the African representation. Not only African, India with 1 billion people plus is not represented. Then there are others in Europe, the Germans, who were vanquished during the war, the Second World War. They are a big power representing the European Union. They are not represented except France. Yeah. So when you talk about representation, there are so many that have been denied justice. So in this aspect, if the world body sits, and if the Americans, the British, and the French sit down and look into themselves, that the era of hegemony has passed, that it is now the era of collaboration. It is a globalized world. Every part of the globe has to have a stake in whatever is being decided at the World Forum. Then we'll have the opportunity to be represented.
All right. As you know, there are various challenges facing the Agenda 2063 initiatives and others. What should the continent of Africa and individual countries and their leaders do to come out of such challenges?
Well, the challenge can only be faced if you are united, not only verbally, but also in reality. Some African countries may have certain strings attached to left or right, and if they continue to do that, it will undermine the supreme idea of an African independent development. So unity is first and foremost, and the idea of consolidating their independence through astute democratic development, through the promotion of legality, law and order in their own individual countries, and not be a victim to certain obstacles posed by former colonial rulers. And also, if they look forward from now to the next 60 years, 70 years, and ask themselves, what kind of a continent are we going to bequeath to our children and grandchildren? That should be top in their mind. So if they can do that, I think the resoluteness, the determination of our leaders is paramount in this aspect.
The African Union has launched various big initiatives, including Agenda 2063, African Continental Free Trade Area, Continental e-passport, etc. In your view, Ambassador, how practical have some of these been, and what remains to be done?
It is very practical in as long as individual countries are not selfish in guarding only whatever they have. People should be able to move freely across borders. Then there is peace, there is trade. Yes, there are problems that may come up along with open borders.
Right.
And then if they concentrate their attention on development, on common trade, on common security, then it can be done. In fact, Africa has a fertile ground to do that. Europe, after 100 years war, after the First World War, the Second World War, after so many millions have paid their dear lives, they have started to agree. Take the river Danube, for instance, which starts from Yugoslavia across the Austria and goes up to Germany and many countries. It was a bone of contention. Look at the Rhine River. It was a bone of contention.
Right.
So these countries, they left their individual approach and collaborated on a joint development of the river basins. So now they have a common currency, they have a common defense pact, they have common in every way. Yes, there are still challenges, but their challenges are less than ours, because our challenges are that we have not yet achieved the vision of our forefathers, to have a united, vibrant, and free and wealthy Africa.
Indeed, and let's hope that the best is yet to come, Ambassador.
Indeed, the best is yet to come. Let's keep hope alive, as Jesse Jackson said.
Yes, exactly. Ambassador Teferra, thank you so much for your ideas. Well, the viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program, and many thanks for your company so far. Until I see you next time with yet another program, it's goodbye from me, Shifarao Lago. Bye-bye.